For more on what to expect, we now cross to SABC News anchor Nompumelelo Siziba, who's standing by in Parliament. A very good afternoon to Nompumelelo. Quite eerie scenes outside Parliament there since you've been waiting out in the morning. What are we expecting as we get closer to that time?
Thanks very much, Nzinga. Well, outside of Parliament, we actually have people protesting from COSAS and other organizations, Black Sash, and young students basically protesting, saying that they need government to fund people to be able to have one meal a day because things are so desperate for these students that they're struggling and cannot afford to eat. So this is one of the many issues, of course, that the midterm budget will have to address. We know that COVID-19 has actually worsened the situation, although the grants, the top-up grants that were provided by government helped to go a long way in alleviating the hunger that we saw. But of course, we've been talking about the budget deficit and how we have to keep that in check and how SOEs shouldn't be just bailed out without ensuring that they can actually be viable and so on and so forth. But on the other side, there is the social side, and hence that's why I started my introduction talking about students protesting about desperately needing support just to have a meal a day. And this is the focus that I wanted to have with our editor, Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, who's with me here just to break down this issue. Thandeka, thank you so much for joining us. So, of course, the social side of things has been really critical in this. COVID-19 really messed everybody up, and of course, the grants really helped. And the president did announce that the social relief of distress grant will be extended by another 3 months. Of course, there are always questions about where will the finance minister find money for that. But just your comments around how important it is that whilst the government weighs up its books, it does continue to ensure that people who are vulnerable are taken care of.
Yes, that is the big issue at the center of this particular budget, how it succeeds in addressing the national humanitarian crisis. There is a social humanitarian crisis in the lower levels of this community, the South African society. People have lost jobs. 2.2 million people have been thrown out of the workplace by COVID-19. This adds to the swell of the ranks of the unemployed, which have been growing, and that number of unemployed people had been ticking upwards even before we entered into the COVID recession. So at the human level, we are seeing the human impact of the 51% contraction year on year in the economy. So the delay, I understand, was due to the ministry and the treasury actually looking for the money to see where we can get money to relieve human suffering because of the economic tragedy in our country. Now, the economic situation means that we are going to be behind on our sustainable development goals that we committed to together with other countries that were set by the United Nations. We are also going to be behind in terms of the National Development Plan, which is to some degree the national consensus on what we should be doing with our people, our social development, our economic progress as a people. It also means that we must pay attention to how we can still achieve those goals, particularly the goals in education. In education, we've achieved close to universal access, but it's about the quality of education and the retention and the quality of the outputs, the quality of skills we have to power the economy. We're going to have to address special attention to the demands at the banging at the gate for a meal a day, because many children depend on that meal a day to be even able to concentrate on their studies and to be able to make it out of the web of poverty, leveraging their education and their skills. Then we're going to have to pay attention to the other leg of human development, which is the health leg. Universal access to good quality healthcare in the public sector is going to have to receive far more attention and support from National Treasury, and the people who were working and negotiating negotiating around the terms of universal healthcare coverage are going to have to go back to the drawing table and look at the granular details on how we can bring better healthcare in the light of the pandemic, and how we can fund it is always going to be a challenge.
Yeah, that is the critical thing, isn't it, Thandeka? The funding thereof. We know what needs to be done, but at the same time, there's a priority on the side of National Treasury to cut the cloth, because, you know, we are living beyond our means. We spend more than we get in revenue. So just in short, in terms of just being able to fund all the various priorities and getting that right and bringing the debt down at the same time.
You see, this is a bit of a global debate, and this debate is swirling around the corridors of bodies like the IMF, the World Bank, and we've heard these bodies saying that governments that are able to, that have some fiscal room, must spend, and even those who don't have fiscal room must lean on the side of spending their way to create and stimulate demand in the economy, instead of choking up these economies and hobbling their ability to recover from the hammering that has been brought about by the COVID crisis. Now, in emerging markets throughout the world, our partners in BRICS are having exactly the same dilemma: how to calibrate that balance between spending and stimulating the economy. And this indeed will be the litmus test of the tenure of Tito Mboweni, how he's able to ably navigate that balance, and how he's able to walk this tightrope. And that is the significance of the budget that's being delivered today. That is, Nompu, the reason why the public broadcaster took the decision to come and situate itself at the seat of the legislature, which will have to review this budget and bring it into action. That's why we've situated ourselves at the ports, at the points where infrastructure builds will have to take off. And this is why we've situated ourselves today in the communities around the country, to bring you coverage from the people most affected by the economic decline that our country is going through.
Thank you very much, Thandeka. Yes, indeed. So, Thandeka, as she says, it's a very important midterm budget. It might not necessarily filter through into your life immediately, but we're hoping that the right decisions are going to be taken for the future. The reason why the situation is so critical this time around is because our debt is quite high. At the time of the June supplementary budget, they were talking about a debt to GDP ratio of just over 81%, and they were saying that if we continue as we are, spending in the manner that we are and not getting the kind of revenue coming in that we need to, then on the basis of that trajectory, we'll end up having debt to GDP ratios of about 140% by the year 2028, 2029. Now, if that happens, it means that our debt service costs are going to be extremely high. Currently, they stand at around 21%. Maybe they will have risen because debt has risen perhaps in the interim while government continues to spend on the impact of the COVID-19 situation. So the real game changer will be economic growth, and of course that will come through the implementation of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, assuming that indeed the capacity of state is there to ensure that those various ideas do come to fruition, and that the public sector and the private sector do come together in order to forge ahead and actually make sure that projects that are on the table do come to fruition. So there's a lot running on what comes out of this speech. Is it just going to be another speech where nothing comes to be? And if that's the case, we all need to be very concerned, because it's going to affect our well-being in the future. People who are in the lower class, people who are higher class, if you like, everyone is going to be affected in an adverse manner. And of course, if we don't have a more inclusive economic growth scenario, we are going to have even huger social problems than the ones that we're seeing already today. Nzinga, back to you in studio.